that has been targeted heavily by Republicans. We're definitely going to see efforts to use that leverage to roll back all of that money.
Which side are you on? Which side are you on?
Our next guest is going to be David Dayen. David Dayen is the executive editor at the American Prospect, and he is going to be talking to us about the Republicans taking control of the United States House of Representatives and what that's going to mean for working people in across the United States. So David, appreciate you taking the time to talk to us this morning.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. So, like I said, executive editor of the American Prospect, and you have been working on, you've been working on what it's going to mean for the U.S. House to be controlled by Republicans, and that's going to happen here in just a couple of weeks. And so, give us a top line of what that's going to mean for working people in your estimation.
Right. Well, I mean, the main work product of this Republican Congress is probably going to be hundreds of investigations into the Biden administration. So we should be clear that legislation is probably not their main goal. However, there are going to be these moments where a variety of bills sort of have to pass. You have to fund the government. You have to make sure that the country can borrow to pay its bills. In these moments are opportunities for Republicans to force through their ideological agenda. And they have not been shy about saying that that is what they want to do. They have said very specifically that in two instances, one, legislation to fund the government, it looks like we're going to get an omnibus bill that will take us to September of 2023. But after that, that legislation could be held hostage by Republicans for the purpose of making large budget cuts or tax cuts or whatever it is they want. And the other piece of legislation is known as the debt limit. So what this is, as I said, is the nation's borrowing. It has a set limit of a certain number, and that number can be extended by Congress. If it isn't, then we default on our debt. And obviously, it's kind of a ridiculous piece of legislation. We don't really need it. When we set budgets and when we pass legislation that spends money, we should essentially deem at that point that we're going to pay for that. However, that's not what we do. We put together this thing called the debt limit. And in the past, this has been used by Republicans as sort of a hostage-taking opportunity to cut spending, and particularly with an eye on things like Social Security and Medicare. And in the run-up to the new Republican Congress, members all the way on up to Kevin McCarthy, who's likely to become Speaker, they have said, we are going to use the debt limit, which expires in the spring of 2023. We're going to use that as leverage to get cuts to Social Security and Medicare. I mean, they've said it out loud. They've not been shy about this in any way.
Cuts to Social Security and Medicare, like you said, they've said it out loud and they've made these commitments publicly. Before we get into that, what are some of the other things that they are looking at? Are there other programs that they have, in the public taken aim at and made clear that these are going to be some of the things that's going to be on, they'll have their targets set on as bargaining chips whenever they have this leverage come, September 2023 for the budget or spring of 2023 for the debt ceiling?
Yeah, I think the big one is the money that was given in the Inflation Reduction Act to the IRS. So in the Inflation Reduction Act, there was $80 billion that was earmarked to the IRS. The IRS has been gutted over the last couple decades, mostly under Republican control of Congress, to the point that they can't do basic customer service anymore. I mean, you can't get a human being on the phone at the IRS, for example. And audits of wealthy people have essentially gone by the wayside at the IRS. Wealthy people, corporations, those audits almost don't happen anymore. And this money was intended to ensure that tax that is owed is collected, and that people have a half decent experience dealing with the tax system. And that has been targeted heavily by Republicans, both in the election and since the election. So we're definitely going to see efforts to use that leverage to roll back all of that money from the IRS.
Well, now, I don't understand why they would want to take money from the IRS, because I thought they liked law enforcement. That was my understanding.
The tax police are definitely not being funded under a Republican government, nor are the white collar police, right? I mean, we don't see a lot of money put to corporate crime either.
Well, and you know, that's something that we talk about quite a lot on the program, is that anytime there's a law or a quote unquote law enforcement agency, which if you wanted to, stress the term, the IRS really is a law enforcement agency, right? Anytime there's a quote unquote law enforcement agency like the IRS or like OSHA, like the NLRB, like MSHA, all of these programs that really are, in a certain sense, law enforcement, anytime that those help working people or target bosses and rich people, the Republicans are against law enforcement.
And by the way, I believe the number is that the NLRB has been operating under the same budget for the last 13 years.
Yes.
They have not gotten any kind of raise, even though the population has grown and inflation has grown. Similar with, budgets like the SEC, and some of the other ones you were talking about, OSHA. I mean, I think the standard is that OSHA can only, under its current budget, can only monitor a workplace something like every 70 years. I mean, like that's how meager a budget that OSHA has. So, I mean, this is the kinds of things that historically Republicans don't want to fund. And they're going to have that opportunity to look at domestic spending in that fashion, and with an eye towards cutting back whatever gains were made in the last 2 years. But of course, the military budget is a magic budget that doesn't have to be cut in any way. We have seen over the last 2 years the budget requests from the president on the military be exceeded by billions and billions of dollars, mostly because Republicans in the Senate, which obviously in a 60-vote environment, you need Republicans in the Senate, they have forced those numbers up and up. And that's only going to continue. Pretty soon, we're going to have $1 trillion annual military budget, which is just incredible.
And it's amazing how disconnected the rhetoric is on that issue, especially in particular, because the NDAA was, I believe it was just passed, or it was just passed in one of the houses. And
just passed. Yeah.
And like you said, higher than Biden requested, tens of billions.
45 billion, I believe, was the number that was higher.
Tens of billions of dollars more than it was last year. And just last week, we had Tommy Tuberville going on the right-wing radio circuit, talking about how weak Biden is on the military, and how we need to strengthen the military, and how this budget isn't going to be enough for them or whatever. And it's amazing. It really is amazing how and contrasting that with these other agencies like the IRS, like OSHA, like MSHA, like the NLRB, all of these things that need funding, and how there's never. Sorry, I had COVID last week. That's why I'm broadcasting from home. But why there's never enough for those agencies, but there's similarly, it's there's never enough money to actually give those agencies. But no matter how much money we give to the military, it's never enough. There's always more to be given to them.
And what's the rhetoric from, particularly from Republicans, is that we have runaway spending in Washington, that there's this runaway bureaucracy, that these agencies aren't spending effectively. There's all kinds of waste, fraud, and abuse. And yet, the budgets that these agencies are forced to do their work, their very expansive mission under, pale in comparison to the sprawling nature of the military industrial complex. It's really incredible.
Absolutely. And so we're seeing all this coming down the pike. I know that you're like a journalist and this is really your beat, but I mean, somebody even like a layman like me down here in Alabama don't have like a fancy professional media gig, right? I can see this coming down the pike. So do the Democrats see this?
I mean, there was an opportunity in this lame duck session, which is the last chance for Democrats who hold a majority in both houses of Congress to do something, particularly about the debt limit. So as you remember, they passed the American Rescue Plan, passed the Inflation Reduction Act with just Democrats, right? That was, they used this thing called reconciliation, which is sort of an end around the filibuster. And they used that to, pass a bunch of tax credits for clean energy, this change to the system for pharmaceuticals, that is going to actually bargain for prescription drug prices, all of those things, the money for the IRS, all of that was done just with Democrats on a party line vote. They could have done the same thing to raise the debt limit. The debt limit has been used before in this reconciliation process. It would have taken a little bit of time on the Senate floor, but what they could have done is raise it to a number that was so big that we would never hear about it again and would never threaten the full faith and credit of the U.S. government in a hostage-taking situation, essentially, where Republicans say, we're going to default on the national debt if you don't, make these changes that we want. We could have ended that. We could have ended that essentially forever. We could have raised the debt limit to $111 billion. We could have just made it never a problem again. And there was just no urgency to do that, even though Republicans were saying very openly, this is what we're going to do. We like having this debt limit because we're going to use it to get our priorities done, even though we don't control the presidency, even though we don't control the Senate. So I think this was a huge missed opportunity. Democrats are sleepwalking into a crisis that we're going to see at the beginning of next year. And Democrats are pretty happy now. They feel like they had a midterm that was, not as bad as they thought going into it. They kept the Senate. They increased their numbers in the Senate. They won some things at the state level. The House is very evenly divided. But now we're going to have this impasse next year. And mark my words, this is going to go down to the 11th hour before they come up with a solution. Now, in the past, Republicans have had, because of the filibuster, they have had a way to do this before. Sometimes it's worked out. Sometimes it's gone down to the wire. And in 2011, it led to something called sequestration, which cut those discretionary budgets even further. Just mass indiscriminate cuts to various things like food safety and worker safety, workplace conditions, all of those kinds of things, inspections were cut in after 2011. I don't want to see that happen again, but that is the road that we're heading down.
I just don't understand why is it that what is their reasoning for not doing something about the debt limit right now?
The debt limit historically is a vote that members of Congress don't want to take. And so they put it off and put it off until they have to. If you're raising the debt limit to a big number, you could get an ad that says, ex-senator voted to increase this amount of borrowing to trillions of dollars. What a horrible thing. I've never seen that actually work in a political campaign, right. but that fear is palpable in Washington. And, it's a 50 vote majority in the Senate. And so you have to get the likes of Kyrsten Sinema and Joe Manchin to agree to do this maneuver to take this hostage taking out of the hands. Now, obviously, we saw Sinema move to become an independent during this time. So, they may not have had all 50 votes to move in that direction, but I don't even think they tried. I mean, it was just sort of an assumption that Manchin and Sinema wouldn't be for this, rather than sitting them down with, someone in the financial world who understands what a catastrophe it would be to default on the nation's debt, and have them say, look, this is what's going to play out. And you have an opportunity here to not have this happen. And that's the responsible thing to do for the country, because this could be catastrophic from an economic standpoint. If you allow this default, the world relies on U.S. Treasury bonds as the most stable instrument for debt in the entire world. And if that comes into question, it could spark a global catastrophe. So this is a really dangerous game that Republicans are playing here, and Democrats aren't paying enough attention to what the consequences could be.
And it's a game that they're playing with the express purpose that they're using that as a bargaining chip expressly to hurt people. I mean, that's the thing that, either way, they are hurting people really. And
it's
really
Social
badly.
Security and Medicare, right? Which are these, these bedrock systems to give people a little bit of dignity in retirement and make sure that they have the health care they need. Republicans never want to take these things head on, right? They clearly think that these are programs that need to be smaller, but they don't want to do it all on their own. When they had the control of the government, they didn't cut Social Security and Medicare. They want to get Democrats bought into it so they can deflect the political blame when older people get their checks and they're smaller, or they can't get enough as much Medicare and they have to pay more out of pocket. So that is the game here. They want to use the debt limit to create a bipartisan, grand bargain whereby these things are cut and nobody can blame anybody for it. So that's part of the game here.
So, David, they say that the things that they're going to say, the reasoning is twofold. It's one, on the Social Security and Medicare front, just as a silo, they would say these programs are going bankrupt. Let's tackle that. Right. These programs are going bankrupt. They're going to go bankrupt in X number of years. What does that mean when they say these programs are going to go bankrupt?
Right. So, I mean, we know how Social Security and Medicare work. Workers pay into a fund that pays for the retirement checks to go out for others. Essentially, you paid into this your entire life, and then you're entitled to get these benefits after you retire. So that trust fund has gone up and down over the years. We are in a situation where there are more retirees relative to workers, and those programs are set to be in a position where that trust fund will be depleted. However, Social Security, because of the paying in and going out, is set up for to pay benefits, some level of benefits forever. Maybe not at 100%. But there are very easy ways to deal with the gap, the long run gap in Social Security. The biggest way is the fact that only a certain percentage of people's income, up to a certain point, if you make over $160,000 a year, that dollar over 160,000, it's something like that. I don't know the exact number, but over 160,000, your Social Security benefits aren't taxed, right? So there's this gap, and if you just scrap that cap, we'd be in a much better situation. Now, in the past, about 90% of all payroll was covered by the Social Security benefits. It was taxed. Now it's more like 80%, and that's because of inequality. That's because of inequality, right? I mean, as incomes go higher and higher, someone making 160,000 a year and LeBron James pay the same amount of Social Security tax, because after 160, none of that gets taxed. And that's the problem, is that there are more and more people making large sums of money, and that's a larger segment of our overall payroll. And so if you would just figure out a way, and it would be very easy, it's a one-line bill, to scrap that cap on Social Security payroll taxes, then this gap would magically go away. But of course, that would harm rich people, right? So that is not the way that we think about these things. Rather, it's talked about, oh, we got to cut benefits because we can't afford the benefits. There are plenty of options that do involve no cuts to benefits that would get us into balance, actuarial balance on Social Security. And similar things are true of Medicare too. The biggest being the fact that we can negotiate on the price of prescription drugs, as we're going to do, but that's a little bit in the future. If we would just accelerate that, that would take down the amount of money that Medicare is paying out, and thereby extend the life of the Medicare Trust Fund.
The other thing that they use to attack these programs are, they've got the one where these programs in and of themselves, they're going bankrupt. And I think that, you've gone through why that's really, really, really disingenuous. But the other thing that they're going to say is that these programs, as a part of the federal budget, are deleterious to the United States. They're just, we're spending too much money. We are too far in debt. Look, number big. That's bad. Why? What would you say to that?
I mean, that's an abstract way of saying what they don't want to say fully, which is we think poor people should have a worse experience in their retirement. I mean, that's essentially what they're saying without saying it, right? I mean, they just say, "Oh, we're spending too much." Well, what are your priorities? What should we be spending on? No, we're just spending too much. But it doesn't mean that the military gets less. Doesn't mean that large tax deductions for things like mortgage interest, which go disproportionately to the wealthy, it doesn't mean we cut those back. Doesn't mean we cut other tax breaks back for corporations, for very rich people, on estates, after inheritance taxes, things like that. It means that we cut these programs that are generally for poor people. Programs for the poor or are poor programs is one statement that I've often seen made. The big lobbyists out there are covering corporations. They're covering, very, very wealthy people. There are many lobbyists for the poor. And so those programs get targeted ultimately when you make an abstract argument like we're spending too much.
Right. Somebody said in the chat, or we could simply revert back to 1950s levels of taxation. We could make America great again, something like that.
That's right. Yeah, they want to bring back the 50s. Why not bring back the tax rates too?
Right. Which were, just to make it clear for the audience, something like 90% on the top marginal tax rate in the 50s.
Marginal tax rate. It doesn't mean 90% of all your money is taken by the federal government. It means that over a certain level, we're going to tax at that rate.
Right. And so, Why are I guess you said it. Why are Republicans so dead set on killing these programs? It's because that that they want to make the experiences of the poor worse. Even though Social Security and Medicare really helps their key demographic more than anybody else is the elderly.
I mean the other part of that is that Social Security and Medicare, which have been in place, Social Security since the 1930s, Medicare since the 1960s, are examples of government being very successful in achieving its goals of, broadly shared prosperity, protecting the general welfare. Republicans look at successful programs and say, we don't want to give people too many ideas. We don't want to let them know that maybe we could afford free college for people. We don't want to let them know that maybe we could, if we do Medicare and it's successful for the elderly, that maybe we can do it for everybody. We don't want to get people comfortable with the idea that government is a solution to people's problems. So we need to mess up those programs so that it furthers our argument that government is not equipped to handle the challenges of the 21st century. So I think there's an ideological aspect to this that they don't want to see successful programs thrive.
I guess it's really difficult to predict what's going to happen, but what would be your predictions going into the debt ceiling limit expiring in the spring, the budget in the fall? How can Democrats stop these attacks on either Social Security and Medicare and the benefits that those give to the elderly population, or the entire global economy? One of those it looks like those are going to be under attack. How can Democrats stop them?
The good news is that all of these things we're talking about that Republicans want to do are very unpopular, right? And they don't want to be tagged as solely responsible for these things happening. They don't want to be the people who took away your Social Security, who took away your Medicare. They want to make it a grand bargain between Democrats and Republicans, so nobody's responsible. So if Democrats hold the line and force Republicans to be the ones to pull that trigger, responsible, for a debt default, somebody's going to blink. Right. And it's possible it will be Republicans. I mean, the problem for Republicans in the House to manage this strategy is that they have a very thin majority. So they might not even have majority support to do this kind of stuff because they're relying on some moderates, relative moderates. I mean, we're talking about Republicans here, but relative moderates in places that Biden won, in places like New York and California. Those hold the majority in their hands. And so it is going to be difficult for Republicans to sustain this, especially if Democrats are out there every day pounding this message that Republicans are the ones coming after your Social Security, coming after your Medicare, and Republicans are the ones that are threatening to take down the global economy if we don't give them these things. So there's going to be very tense negotiations and fights around these little moments of leverage opportunities. And Democrats are going to have to hold strong and make the message and put it out there in public of what's going on.
Do Democrats have the fortitude to do that?
I mean, we'll find out. We'll find out. President Biden has said, we're not touching Social Security. We're not touching Medicare. So he has said that publicly. Now, he could have secured that in the lame duck session by just taking the debt limit off the table. But I think Democrats think they can win this fight in the court of public opinion. We'll see if they can do it.
David Dayen, executive editor at the American Prospect. Really appreciate you taking the time to talk to us this morning.
All right. Thank you.
You just saw a clip from the Valley Labor Report. We are live every Saturday morning from 9:30 a.m. till 12:30 p.m. And we pride ourselves on keeping all of our content free to everybody so that we can talk to as many working folks as possible. If you support the work that we're doing, you think that it's important, you think that it's good, then consider making a monthly contribution to the project, and you can do that on our website, tvlr.fm.